you. Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Barker, and I've led an international group of readers through a bunch of books since the start of the pandemic. We started with the Decameron in April of 2020 because we just thought that it would be so much fun to read plague tales from the late Renaissance during the modern plague of COVID-19. And when we were done with the 100 Tales in 100 Days of Boccaccio's Decameron, readers started asking me what next, and I realized that I've gotten myself into a serious mess, that every time we'll come to the end of one book, we will have to just continue. I think this will go on indefinitely until we run out of books to read, which is an impossibility. And so at that point in the summer of 2020, I realized that this COVID business is here to stay, and some of the losses that we're experiencing are permanent. And so the book that I thought of at that point was Paradise Lost by John Milton. And so that was our fall 2020 reading, and we read a 300-page poem written during Restoration in England. So you see there are parallels between what we did in Paradise Lost and what we are doing with Balzac, because all the authors that we'll be doing our French here are Restoration authors. And Milton wrote Paradise Lost during the restoration of the Stuart monarchy in England after horrible, catastrophic revolutionary times of beheading kings. You see, England made beheading kings popular way before France decided to start doing that. With the beheading of Charles I, England had a bloody revolution. Of course, Oliver Cromwell influenced the writing of Paradise Lost, and the character of Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost was very much so influenced by the character of Milton, who would much rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. And then just sort of to finish that awful year, I just decided to offer the best book ever written. And it is, of course, Gilgamesh, the ancient Mesopotamian epic. So I offered 10 Days of Gilgamesh, and in the fall of 2020, at the end of that year, it afforded me terrific opportunity to spend a couple of weeks researching the holdings of the British Museum, of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, of let's see, where else did I go? The Pergamon Museum in Berlin, and the Baghdad Museum of Iraqi treasures. And every single image was probably researched longer for Gilgamesh than any other image I posted. Sometimes it would take 2-3 days to find just the perfect image for that moment in Gilgamesh, because I'm not a specialist on medieval art, Middle Eastern art or literature. So it was a crash course for me too, and it was so much fun. And then because I teach Russian literature, it was a no-brainer. After you do Paradise Lost and Gilgamesh, you had to do War and Peace, the book that deals with everything, all in one swell 1,200-page pile. And then because Dostoevsky was 200 last year, we did 100 years of Brothers Karamazov. So last year I commented every single day for 250 days on something related to Russian literature. And that takes a chunk out of your soul. You cannot survive that without permanent damage to some part of your inner workings. And so I thought this year I'm going to offer fun stuff personally for me. And I'm just giving it this little intro to those of you who just joined us for our French journey. I see a lot of faces and names who have been with us for a while now. So welcome everyone who is continuing this journey, and welcome to all of the new readers. And those of you who have been with me last fall, you sort of knew the rationale for this, because we got halfway through Brothers Karamazov. And some of you were wondering, like, wow, Anna, how are you doing this? And the answer is, I have no idea. It's just me. I don't have a research team. And I have no idea what I'm going to write every single day. So that's what makes it fun for me. I have no idea what the image of the day is going to be, and I have no idea what the comment of the day is going to be. So at some point I just unplug from reality and churn out these posts. And in the fall last year, I just sort of felt I need to go. One of you has has a mic that is not muted, and I can hear some echo. So if you could all mute right now, and then we will unmute when we are going to be asking questions. And when we have sort of the question and answer session, I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand, and then you'll unmute one at a time when you ask the question. Sounds good? Okay. So yes, last fall I just thought, despite the fact that my French is non-existent, and right now, like I can see like 6 people just leaving right away, like, who is she to talk to us about French literature? But I've loved it since I was a teenager. So, I mean, some of you know that from my outpourings that I didn't really learn how to read till I was 10 years old. It's because I grew up with all of these grown-ups, and every time I needed a book read, there was always an available grown-up. I was the only child, the only grandchild, so I could always commandeer some human being to read a book to me. And then when I was 10 years old, it was my grandmother's 60th birthday, and there were all of these guests in the house. And I was furious because I was, 10, and my grandmother belonged to me. And all of a sudden, they were having grown-up fun and telling stories. And I was so furious, I went into my room, banged the door, and I sat down and I read a book. And at first I thought, wow, that'll show them. And then I literally remember closing the book and realizing I just read a book. It was a fairy tale. It was the 12 Dancing Princesses. So, and after that, it was like Robinson Crusoe and Don Quixote and all of these amazing adventures, Three Musketeers. I remember reading that and just going to the end of the book. And literally, like, as soon as I read the last page, I opened the first page and I started reading again because I just thought this was the best book ever written. So I read it twice in a row because I just needed more excitement. And the one book that stuck with me, and I was 16 years old when I read it, it was The Red and the Black. So some of you wondering what next, and we're reading Stendhal's The Red and the Black because it was the book that ruined me. So sort of this ruination through French literature has been an ongoing motif in some of the commentary. And that book is ruinous. It is morally completely destabilizing. Let's just put it this way. And you sort of sense just from reading Colonel Chabert that these post-revolutionary, post-Napoleonic books all deal with issues of what does it mean to be a moral human being, and is a moral human being possible at a time when glory, fame, honesty, morality sort of disappeared from the French landscape. And we'll talk about this a little bit in the context of Colonel Chabert. And then, of course, the second book that I loved so much that I read it and I closed it and I started reading it again was The Count of Monte Cristo. And both The Red and the Black and The Count of Monte Cristo are books that deal with Napoleon. So elements of Napoleon's life are an integral part of the plot of both books. And both books are keenly aware of the fact that he's gone. And you sense that from Colonel Chabert. Napoleon is gone, and there's something rotten in the kingdom of France, right? And then Les Miserables is the biggest, chunkiest, most epic of all the French novels. And I didn't read that till I was in my 20s. I reread it 10 years ago because the novel was 150, and I sobbed like a baby. Those of you who will stay with us all the way to 100 Days of Les Miserables in the fall, I'm going to start crying just thinking about it. That novel undoes you. And the terrific psychological insight into the complexity, what it means to be a human being, it's just something that you're not prepared for that novel. You will read a whole bunch of stuff and you're still not prepared for the terrific emotional climb that you will have to undergo. It's as if it's one of those novels, what Coleridge said at the end of his Rime of the Ancient Mariner, a sadder but a wiser man, he rose the morrow morn. It's like this wisdom through trial that awaits you at the end of that book. And it's 160 this year. I knew that I had to do some kind of celebration for Les Mis in 2012, but we were too busy commemorating the 200th anniversary of the War of 1812. And there was only one of me and only so much commemorating of literary works. So this year I just thought I owe it to Victor Hugo. And Victor Hugo's life, his personal life, is so intertwined with the life of all of these Napoleons. So keep in mind that there were 3 Napoleons, and the 3rd Napoleon will figure very prominently in the personal life of Victor Hugo, and the 1st Napoleon will figure very prominently in the lives of his characters in Les Miserables, because that revolution is basically all dedicated to the revolution. That book is dedicated to the revolution of 1830. And there's a huge chunk of the book that describes the Battle of Waterloo. And in the abridged editions of Les Miserables, that chunk is taken out, because like, who wants a 50-page description of a battle? But we're doing it the right way. We will get the full Battle of Waterloo. And of course, in Colonel Chabert, we have references to it, because remember Chabert's buddy who remembered him, because he remembered Chabert, because it's amazing how personal stories have such a terrific impact on the plot elements of Colonel Chabert. And that is very much, though, something that we'll see in Les Miserables. So Colonel Chabert is a great entry novella. It's short, it's French, it covers all the necessary points of French history of that time period. It's a great entry point into everything we're doing this year, because like going back to the past and hearing all of these stories and revealing all of these secrets about the past is very much, though, a part of both the Count of Monte Cristo and Les Miserables. And then when we turn into 2023, we will read Flaubert's Madame Bovary, and I will have to confess to you, not a favorite of Anna Barker. I've argued with several readers over the past 2-3 weeks, and they're like, Anna, but it's stylistically so beautiful. And I tell people, and contextually so absolutely devastating. So if you are not devastated enough after these 4 books, Madame Bovary will do you in, and I guarantee it. I just remember reading it in my 20s, and I was a young married woman then, and I just thought I shouldn't have read this book. No. It's very dangerous to read this book when you are newly married and just sort of feel like, wow, you have a life ahead of you, and then that book just, sucks you in the stomach and says, well, think again. So many of you, those of you who were with me for War and Peace, asked for Anna Karenina. And in my perverse Anna Barker fashion, I just thought, okay, I need a break from Russian lit. You can't handle 2 years of that in a row. 2, I wanted to share some of the books that I loved when I was a teenager and books that I loved when I was in my 20s. And 3, Tolstoy considered Anna Karenina to be his most European novel. And so I really felt that we need to do our homework. Before Anna Karenina, we should read some European novels. And, to be really, truly like committed to Tolstoy, we need to read some English European novels too. We need to read some Lawrence Stern, and we probably need to read some Dickens before we read Anna Karenina. So who knows, maybe I'll keep dangling you at the end of a string and we'll just do something as shocking as reading Lawrence Stern in 2023. We would be the only reading group reading Lawrence Stern in the world. And so, after doing 5 French novels in 1 year, I really feel like I deserve the Legion of Honor. And after maybe doing 5 English novels in 2023, how about the Order of the Garter? So I'm aiming high if I'm going to proliferate French and English literature for years. But really, I really thought that before we read Anna Karenina, we should read not just French novels, but English novels. So I'm thinking about this. And so many people have been asking me, Anna, have you read Dickens lately? And I'm like, well, not for the past 10 years. So who knows, maybe we'll be together for a year of French literature, a year of English literature, and then Anna Karenina, we'll see. So without much further ado, Colonel Chabert, and just the one thing that I wanted to say, it is the most meticulously crafted gift to humanity pretty much ever written. Not a single part of this novella is out of place. You read the first 10 pages and there's foreshadowing for everything that happens. What is a play? It is a spectacle you watch for money. Well, what is a human life? It's a spectacle, and we are the readers who just paid some money to watch the destruction of a human life. And Balzac is so incredibly theatrical in everything he does, you know, like all of these entrances and exits, and the fact that Chabert already leaves, and one of the boys, the clerks in the law firm, cries out and says, "What is your name?" And so it's like these delay tactics, and all of a sudden he says, "Colonel Chabert," boom, 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 and thunder and lightning, and then all of these kids who are working in this law firm, and you can see them as just such colorful individuals. They're snarky, they're irreverent, they're making fun of all of their clients. It's just explosive from the first line. The first line just draws us into this law firm, and then thunder and lightning, the man who died at the battle of Ilo, and he's like, the same. So we are stuck there all of a sudden. You know, we are gripped by this thing. We have a corpse standing in front of us. And remember, they were talking about going to see, you know, but is watching the water of Seine go down underneath Pont Neuf. Is that a spectacle? Well, it is a spectacle, but do you pay money for it? Is watching a museum full of waxworks. I mean, like Madame Tussauds was very popular. That kind of creepiness was very popular in France after the Revolution. People went to see waxworks. And so, you know, is that the kind of, it's a spectacle, you know, you pay money for it, but is it a play? And it's fascinating that the first time Monsieur Derville sees Chabert, he's standing in the shadows, and he's like, I mean, there are so many things that I didn't comment in my commentary because it's impossible to cover this novella, but he's like a portrait of Rembrandt, frozen without a frame. And then just his face is visible, but his whole body's in the shadows. So he is that waxwork, you know, and then his life unfolds and flows in front of us like the river under a bridge. And just everything about him, just this stoic, wounded human being who is physically disfigured, because that scar that he gets from the nape of his neck through his entire face must be absolutely horrific. But also he is emotionally completely disfigured. And it is a difficult novella to get through. I mean, it deals with issues of war and how absolutely horrific warfare is. The scene where he is climbing out of a pile of corpses, that's the scene that I said is unforgettable. There is no other scene like that anywhere in world literature. And how he's grateful to the sloppiness of the man who was throwing these corpses into the pit, because they threw two corpses in a way that it allowed him to have some air to breathe. And then he finds that arm of Hercules, and just some detached but very muscular, strong arm that he uses as a shovel to dig himself out of a pile of corpses. And so he has three arms at this point, his two and the arm of some Hercules. And then when he finally emerges out of this womb of death, I mean, it literally is like a second birth of this human being. And he takes his first breath and he faints because it's winter. That's why I gave you the date of the battle. It's cold, and then he realizes just how severe his brain trauma is. And so this traumatized, wounded human being, he suffers a loss of memory. And this lovely human being, who is a German peasant, a woman, walks by, and she realizes that he is alive. She goes after her husband, and they care for this human being for 6 months. I mean, it's just incredible. Can this peasant family afford to care for a human being for 6 months in their pathetic little hovel? Probably not. But the humanity of these unnamed dwellers of this Prussian town, and see the two armies that clashed in this Prussian town, one was French, one was Russian, but they were on the receiving end of a battle that happened on their soil. And so they don't even ask what nationality is this human being. It's a human being who is alive and in need of help. And so here we have the horror of war, the inhumanity of war, the human capacity to care under catastrophic circumstances, And then we get to issues of veterans affairs, right? And treatment of veterans and mental health. So this issue, in addition to all of the overlayer of historical significance, asks very, very important questions about the nature of warfare, the outcomes of war, and the treatment of veterans and mental health issues. And people don't believe him. He ends up screaming when he recovers that he's Colonel Chabert, and he's placed into a mental institution. And remember, they don't release him out of this mental institution till he finally says, no, no, forget about it. I'm not Colonel Chabert. Do you see, for him to be himself is detrimental to himself. It's just absolutely staggering how this human being's identity would have been his glory if Napoleon would have stayed in power. So if Napoleon would not have fallen, Colonel Chabert would have been the greatest hero of France. But because Napoleon has fallen, all of these heroes of the Napoleonic Wars become completely inconvenient in France. And so he has to deny who he is in order to get a crust of bread. He went to so many lawyers to try to prove his identity, but he says to Monsieur d'Urville that nobody wanted to see him, nobody wanted to talk to him, because remember, there are no chairs in the lawyer's office, because you don't want to linger in that office. You see, chairs are only offered in a lawyer's office to someone who looks like they can pay for the time that they occupy that chair. And so Colonel Chabert does not look like a person who has the means to pay for the time he would be occupying a chair in a lawyer's office. So obviously he went from lawyer to lawyer to lawyer to lawyer without any luck, because nobody even wants to listen to him. I mean, he's not worth the time of him occupying a chair. He finally goes to Monsieur d'Urville for one reason only, because Monsieur d'Urville is his wife's lawyer. And here we come to conflict of interest, right? So that is the question that I actually wanted to ask of all of you. Is Monsieur d'Urville serving the Countess of Ferrot more than Colonel Chabert? I mean, what are you going to do if you are a young lawyer in Paris? And note his lifestyle. You know, he does all of his work at night, just like Anna Barker. His brain starts focusing on the cases that he's going to bring up at court the day after, only after midnight. He sleeps at some point, apparently, because at night he goes out to society. And remember, when the silly clerks asked Colonel Chabert to show up after midnight, he was stunned, but he said, well, if that's what it takes, I'll come after midnight. And Monsieur d'Urville comes in evening clothes, right? So he just went to a social event, you know, opera, ballet, ball. So he's wearing his evening clothes. And why does he go to all of these evening events? Because he needs to keep up his social connections. So do you see how even a brilliant lawyer like d'Urville, who is young and extremely successful in this restoration world, Monsieur d'Urville is successful not just by his wits, but by his social connections. And this is the world that Colonel Chabert cannot crack open for himself, because he belonged to a world where you succeed by merit. And that is the greatest reason why all of those 7 coalitions, well, the first 2 coalitions were against revolutionary France, but the last 5 coalitions were against revolutionary France and Napoleon and the empire, because Napoleon presented the kind of threat to European monarchies that they just could not let go. It was a threat of a human being who was by merit made, right? And I'm quoting Milton here. He points out that both Satan in Paradise Lost and Jesus Christ in Paradise Lost, because he's one of the characters, were by merit raised, right? So that is the thing about Napoleon. He was a self-made man, and Colonel Chabert was a self-made man. And all of the people who we encountering, the Restoration people, they succeeded through connections. See, so that is the big political drama that is unfolding in front of us. Chabert, and so many, actually, I ran through all of your comments just before I plugged into Zoom. And you are asking, was Chabert sort of like resigned to the stoic or meaningless life at the end? It's just a person like Chabert cannot succeed in Restoration France. There's no place for a person of great individual courage and bravery who makes a position for himself through his own greatness. You have to work the system in order to succeed in Restoration France. And it is creepy, it is filthy. People play the stock market. Remember, a lawyer's office is compared to a lottery office or brothel. There's just something filthy about everything that is happening in this Restoration France. And people play the stock market, and there are lottery offices. Actually, Balzac talks about a woman who works at a lottery office in his novel, Two Brothers. And people live in the hope of winning these lottery allotments because life is just so incredibly bedraggled in Restoration France that you hope for miracles, and the government knows that. So playing the stock market and waiting for a lottery winning becomes almost a point of merit in Restoration France, where Chabert is completely his own man. You know, he's this soldier who is walking around the streets of Paris, and it's revolution and it's heady times. And there are times when, you know, all of Paris just kind of revolts and decides to massacre people on the streets. I mean, revolutions are not pretty sights. Do you remember I wrote in my comments from last night that they were legalizing so many things during the revolutionary times. They legalized divorce. Divorce is not going to be as open and available in France as it was during the years right after the revolution of 1789 till after World War II. So prostitution became legal in 1791. But then there were so many problems with too many illegitimate children that the state decided to stop allowing prostitutes to just walk the streets of Paris. And so Chabert actually tells Rosine, I picked you up on the street like a cab. And it's extremely hurtful for her to say that. But we have to understand that she's Countess Ferraud now. And Monsieur d'Urville tells Chabert, look, she was your wife. Granted, you know, that's great, but now she's a mother. So the ties that tied her to you are not as strong in legal terms as the ties that tie her to her new husband. And Chabert says, but she's not a widow. And d'Urville says, that's not my point. She's a mother to the children of Comte Ferraud. And he has a very high status in society. But do you see the complexity of her marriage to Count Ferraud? She marries Count Ferraud when Napoleon is still alive and well and has power. She is the glorious widow of Colonel Chabert. So do you see what Chabert meant in the history and the historic psyche of France? So let me just put it this way. This teenage clerk, his jaw drops in Restoration France when Chabert says that his name is, he just says Chabert. And it's the kid, the teenager, who says, Colonel Chabert, the one who died at the Battle of Eylau? Can you imagine what that name meant at the time of Napoleon? So if it's a jaw-dropping explosion in the room kind of name in this world where all that has been swept under the rug and forgotten, can you imagine what that name meant at the time of Napoleon? So she becomes a widow of the greatest hero of France. He got the Legion of Honor from Napoleon, and Napoleon established the Legion of Honor as both a civil and military award for people who have done amazing things for France. And it replaced, Napoleon really felt that people will fight for a piece of ribbon. That's actually what he said, that, you know, it's like, It's like in The Wizard of Oz, right? The lion has courage because he gets a medal. And so Napoleon was very aware of the fact that people love awards and medals, and all of the monarchist awards and medals were abolished by the revolution, right? So in 1802, Napoleon feels like, I need to start giving away ribbons. And so I posted that stunning painting that was done in 1804 of Napoleon awarding the first Legion of Honor award. So Colonel Chabert is such an incredible Frenchman that he received the Legion of Honor from Napoleon himself, right? And so can you imagine the weight that name had during Napoleon's time? He sends people, Napoleon personally sends people to look for his corpse on the battlefield. He feels that the outcome of the battle was so much, owes so much to Chabert's presence on the battlefield that he wants to make sure that this man is dead. And so his widow is absolutely Napoleon's favorite, right? He is responsible for this woman because she is the widow of France's greatest hero of the day. And so when she marries Comte, she is a dream for a social climber, right? Because she is the widow of Colonel Chabert. And of course, Colonel Chabert had a lot of money. Did you also notice that Colonel Chabert made his will before he married Rosine, right? And in his will, he bequeathed, I think, a quarter of his fortune to hospitals, and they are veterans hospitals. So do you see how care for veterans just sort of runs throughout this entire novella? Colonel Chabert worries so much about what happens to men who go through the horrors of war and then are left homeless on the streets. And so of his fortune, he wants 1/4 to be given to the care of veterans, right? And somehow Rosine managed to even get her grubby hands even on that money. And so Napoleon gives his blessing to this marriage, and it's a terrific social climbing moment for Comte. But then Napoleon is gone. And remember, Napoleon goes through 2 abdications. One after the disastrous Sixth Coalition set of wars that culminated in the catastrophe of the Battle of Leipzig, and was called the Battle of Nations because it was basically everyone against everyone in Europe. And I wrote about that battle in my pre-Colonel Chabert history notes. So he abdicates then, and he leaves for the island of Elba. He is given his own personal guard, and he's basically the ruler of a Mediterranean island. And then he escapes, and that escape will be the crucial element of the entirety of the plot of the Count of Monte Cristo. And then there's the War of the Seventh Coalition and the Battle of Waterloo, disaster for France. And then he abdicates a second time, and in 1815, sent to the island of St. Helena. Did you notice also how Colonel Chabert meets someone whose life he saved? And there are certain details of their encounter that only this one person would know. And so this one person is absolutely stunned that this man is alive. And he is willing to vouchsafe for the identity of Colonel Chabert because only those two could have known this very, very specific detail. But then he dies at the Battle of Waterloo, right? So the only witness to the identity from his army days is gone. And so that's why he starts looking for a way to approach his wife. But you see, she's a pretty fancy lady because her husband now is a first consul or a consul of France, and he wants to climb even higher. He wants to become peer. So the position, let me explain what the difference would be for Comte. Right now, his position is not hereditary. If he becomes a peer of France, it becomes hereditary. So his son would be able to get the peerage from his father. That's what he's aiming at. So, you know, he has a very comfortable position in society right now, but it's an appointed position. What he wants is peerage, which is a position that is hereditary. And for him to divorce Rosine would be the only way for an annulment of this marriage, right? And then he can marry a peer's daughter and become a peer. And so that would be a very advantageous move for him right now. The only thing that keeps him with Rosine at this point is her money, right? And do you remember, this associate of hers comes to her boudoir. And so that's why I needed to post to you the whole essence of what a boudoir is. And remember, she was drinking coffee and giving coffee to her little monkey. It's a very lively scene. I mean, you can just imagine this like vivacious French woman with all of her frilly clothes and beautiful makeup and beautiful hair, and she is trying to still act young, right? It's a constant thread that is going through all of the novels of Balzac. Women who get to the point where their beauty is not enough for them to survive in society, and how devastating it is, and how they're just doing absolutely everything possible to preserve a part of their vivaciousness in order for them to have validity in this completely empty and devoid of all soulfulness French society. And so she's vivacious. She has this little vivacious monkey. She's giving monkey coffee, and we're distracted by all that, right? It's all of the bling and glitter of high society. In the meantime, she's talking to this associate because he's playing with her money on the stock exchange. And without her winning all the time, her position in her marriage with her husband will be very precarious, because what he wants is hereditary title, and she cannot give him that, right? So complicated, right? And so the only person now who could prove the identity of Colonel Chabert is his wife. And Derville sets up this meeting, and as soon as Chabert sees her reaction to him, he knows that she knows. And how clever is that woman? You know, she makes this big fuss in the lawyer's office, and it's fireworks, and I'll sue you. And then she knows that she could lose the lawsuit, and she cannot afford that, because it would be such a personal scandal that her husband would just divorce her and annul their marriage, right? It would, like, any scandal would jeopardize her position in this marriage right now. And so she becomes the crafty Balzac heroine. Women in Balzac are devious. I've gone through about 7 Balzac novels since November, and my goodness, I've learned things about people do to each other that I never imagined they are capable of. That's what I mean when I say that Balzac novels will ruin you. You just think like, wow, you know, people don't do that to each other. And you're like, what? And they do it over and over and over and over and over again. You think like, you know, at some point this family should just, you know, have a nice calm meal and just kind of smile, not discuss anything controversial. And then they keep doing it to each other until they just destroy everyone. And then they realize like, oh, we probably shouldn't have done that. Too late now. So Rosine, I mean, she has a way of enchanting men. That's how she succeeded in life. She knows what she is worth, and she's worth a lot more than she was worth when she walked the halls of Palais Royal. She knows what she needs to do. She needs to employ her feminine wiles, and she takes him to the country house and she works him over. And she does everything. I mean, she employs her children. Did you notice how just at the moment where she felt like, oh, this man is a rock, this little charming scene of these delightful children appears. She is devious, crafty, and absolutely delightfully rotten, and you feel so proud of her because she does it so well. So do you see the beauty of Balzac novels? You encounter these characters who are duplicitous, despicable, morally rotten to the core, but they succeed. And Balzac is just superb at understanding how human psychology works. And it works not the way we think it should work. It works in completely unpredictable, realistic, horrible ways. And eventually, I mean, she slips, right? Because she says she doesn't think that Chabert is present. And she says to her associate, well, if we can't break him, well, lock him up in the loony bin. And Chabert hears that, and he, an old man, and you know, and they sort of make a reference that he's an old horse, right? And he leaps over that ditch and he kicks the associate, and he says, this old man, this old horse can kick too. But then, of course, he's completely out of energy. You know, it was like the last hurrah to kick this. I mean, we are pleased as readers that Chabert kicks this associate because, you know, he's a pomaded, worthless nobody, right? He is the one who does the dirty deeds for Countess Ferrot, and she pays him good money for it, right? So it's good for us to have that emotional triumph of Chabert, but that's the end. And then he just looks at her in the face and he says, you know what, I never should have married you. You have no heart. Oh, my goodness, because when he sees her first, you know, he loves her. He loved her because she was a beautiful woman and she used her beauty to get things out of men all her life. And she's very, very good at it. But then, you know, he just looks at her and he says, I don't love you anymore because you don't have a heart. I'm sorry, it's just so devastating, so devastating. And then, I mean, I can't even talk about the last 2 pages of the novel. It's just, or novella. It's too hard. And I read your discussion about, you know, whether he accepts it, whether he becomes stoical. It's just, there's no place for a man like him in Restoration France. There's no place for men who are self-made and, you know, heroic and do things by their own wits on the battlefield. That's over. And please remember the statement when you start reading The Red and the Black, because there you feel it from page 1. Napoleon is gone. Napoleon is dead. France has become, you know, the French used to joke that England is a country of shopkeepers, right? And that's sort of the nasty French joke about the English. You know, they have, you know, all they worry about are their, you know, balance sheets and ledgers, and, you know, the sort of Dickinsonian world where everyone just worries about money. France was not that country under Napoleon. But when you start reading The Red and the Black, the main character, Julien Sorel, lives in a world of shopkeepers. And he's a kid with an aching heart and a burning desire to achieve greatness in a world where such a thing is impossible. So if you are ready for more tragedy of wild ambitions dashed and wild ambitions soaring, and it is a mad novel. It is a very young novel. It is a mad novel. It is delightful. And it's sort of a Bildungsroman of a kid who wants to do something personally heroic in a world where personal heroism is dead. That's The Red and the Black. And by the way, the red stands for the army and the black stands for clergy. And the gravitation of this young character to one or the other and needing to decide how this personal glory can be achieved in a world where personal glory is completely, completely useless. Well, I've spoken. I didn't know I had it in me. What do I know about Balzac and his world? But I just love, love, love this novella. And I read it in my 20s. And I read this and Les Miserables and Madame Bovary around the same time. And I was just like, okay, well, you know what? I am done with French literature of this period because I just can't handle this much heartache. Those of you who have known me for years now, you know, like I'm a very upbeat and cheerful person. And this is just, you know, Balzac novels are not cheerful at all. Somebody said in the comments that Balzac is perfect for these days of, you know, darkness and sadness. And oh my God, if you want a perfect companion for the end of times, then Balzac is your author. We'll need to read something cheerful one of these days. And I chose the Count of Monte Cristo for the summer because, I mean, I can see some of you having a completely sleep-deprived weekend where you just finish that novel and like live on popcorn and pizza, and you will finish it in 3 days because that novel, you can't put it down. If you think that this was impossible to put down, the Count of Monte Cristo is just like, you are breathless. Like something happens on every page and you feel like, how is any more excitement and action possible? And then it's like, oh my God, and then that happens. So it's a perfect summer read. You will not be able to put it down. But it's fascinating how Monsieur Derville asks Chabert, so do you want revenge to be like the essence of your life? I have to say to you that revenge is the essence of the Count of Monte Cristo. And revenge in Count of Monte Cristo is done in the most heartless, brutal, crafty, dark way. You will know how to be mean to people in very, very elaborate ways. But so much fun. Yes, they're pirates, you know, adventures, fun stuff, islands, Mediterranean, a lot of beautiful women, a lot of completely duplicitous and evil men. One of the women's name is Mercedes, and she is just amazing. So I can't wait to get there. All right, questions. And if you have, yes, Doug. So I'll just call on you because I see all of you on the screen. I'll call on you and then you will unmute and ask the question. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yeah, it was my thing about where's the colonel at the end and how's he feeling about his circumstances. And one of the other ties that popped in my head was Misha at the end of Brothers Karamazov, who's lost everything in his life and is carting off to Siberia, supposedly unjustly convicted and everything else. Yeah.
Yes. But you see, Russian characters have these things called souls. And I mean, can you imagine, like, I don't see that aspect in French literature. There's this like complex weirdness that happens in all of these Russian novels where like, yeah, you know, he has to find himself and he's willing to spend like 1,200 pages to find himself. And here characters just are cut off. I mean, Chabert has no place in society. It's just brutal, completely brutal. And, you know, I posted that comment about a women's hospital that was opened during the Bourbon times before the revolution. And it's amazing, the hospital is still in operation today. It happens to be, I mean, and many buildings were added onto it. So it's the largest hospital in France, but it's fascinating how there were ways of dealing with unwanted people during this time period in France. Mm-hmm. So there were mental institutions. There were institutions where you would send all of these women from the streets. And there were institutions where you would send veterans. And it's amazing how Invalide is mentioned in the novella. And I should really post something on what the Invalide is. It was, well, you know, it was a hospital for the invalids, right? It was a veterans hospital, a Veterans Affairs VA hospital, right? During the time of the Bourbon. And then there's a painting of Napoleon coming to visit soldiers at the Veterans Hospital. And so Napoleon meant so much for military glory of France that when Louis Philippe, who is not a Bourbon king, so we'll have to figure out, I mean, like, remember that France had two empires. So Napoleon I Empire, Napoleon III Empire, and it also is in its fifth republic. So Charles de Gaulle was the one who proclaimed the fifth republic. So the current president of France is the president of the fifth republic. So at some point, I probably will just have to post the dates of when the Bourbon come to the French throne, when they end, when the revolution happens, when Napoleon happens, when the Bourbon come back, and then after the Bourbon, after Charles X, there is a king called Louis Philippe, and he was so unpopular that he just thought, like, there's one thing that could make me popular, and that would be bringing Napoleon's body back to France. Because you're probably wondering, you know, he died in St. Helena, and that monologue of Chabert about how he's saying, like, when I look at this world around me and I think what all of these people are doing while Napoleon is in St. Helena, I mean, that is the essence of what is happening in France. And someone like Chabert, it hurts him personally on an emotional and moral level when greatness is persecuted and thrown into the wastebasket, and he is a part of that greatness. And these non-entities rule France. So Louis Philippe felt like, I have only one way to save my lousy political popularity. And he negotiated with the British. They brought the body of Napoleon, exhumed in St. Helena, and it's an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They brought him back to France. The cortege went through the entirety of the city, and when the coffin stopped underneath the Arc de Triomphe, everyone sang the Marseillaise, and then they proceeded to the Invalides, and it's 1840, and they buried him under the golden dome of Invalides. This hospital was dedicated to military glory. Last time I was there, it's fascinating to get into the onto the grounds of this building. You had to go through airport type of security because it's considered to be a military object, and because of terrorist attacks in France, now it's guarded by the French army. So the military aspect of this building is still very much, though, current today. But Napoleon is buried there in this staggeringly, stunningly gorgeous sarcophagus. And he was brought back. So he died in 1821 on St. Helena, but he was not buried in Paris till 1840. I'm just going to tell you this bit of gossip. There's so much gossip associated with all this. When Francois Mitterrand's numbers were no good, he just decided that he's going to bury Alexander Dumas. So Victor Hugo was already in the Pantheon, right? Because Victor Hugo is God. And so Francois Mitterrand decided, oh, my numbers are lousy. So this is what French politicians do when their numbers are lousy. They dig up some great French person and bring them to glory, right? So Francois Mitterrand decided, we'll dig up Alexander Dumas and we'll bury him next to Victor Hugo in the Pantheon. And are you ready for this? Guess who were the pallbearers of the remains of Alexander Dumas? 4 guardsmen dressed in musketeer clothes. This is not a joke. So French don't do anything by half. I mean, if you want, like, you know, resurrection of old glory, you are going to get resurrection of old glory. So yes, yeah. So there is no place for real glory in this world, but my God, can we like coast off of old glory? Yes. And the French do it better than anyone. And you know what? Before I forget, do you see this incredibly beautiful grandfather clock behind me? I'm actually visiting my mom in Budapest right now, in Budapest, Hungary. And I've seen this clock in an antique shop like 2 years ago. And the date right here, right here is 1804. It's a quiz. What happened in France in 1804? Anyone? Napoleon crowned himself emperor, and it's an empire style clock. And so as soon as I walked into this antique shop, and you know, I walked up to that clock and I saw the date, and I was like, oh my God, this clock was made the year when Napoleon became emperor. And they thought that, you know, I'm a little excitable. But then I started coming back to this antique shop, and they called me the Napoleon lady. Oh yeah, the Napoleon lady is back. And of course, nobody wanted this monstrosity. It's like taller than me. And then they finally, like 2 years after I started like coming to visit my clock, they just were finally like, nobody else will buy it. We'll just, you know, we'll give you a discount, just take it. And so I have a reminder of the date when Napoleon became emperor in the corner right here behind me, which is really fun. So yes, it's an empire clock. And we found out why empire waists are called empire waists. Remember, Jane Austen is a contemporary of Napoleon. So she writes these novels in the early 19th century. So all of these empire waists come from the Roman Empire, where Roman matrons were wearing these loose tunics that were tied with a belt right around their rib cage. The Romans really believed in natural digestion. They didn't have anything restricting your tummies. So if you look at how comfortable all those Roman clothes look, and remember, Romans like would eat while reclining instead of sitting on a chair and completely crushing all of your internal organs while sitting on chairs. They would lounge on these, you know, couches, reclining places, which was so much more comfortable. And so Napoleon admired Julius Caesar tremendously. His Conquest of Gaul was Napoleon's favorite book. And remember, I mentioned that when he was in St. Helena, he wrote his own memoirs and he wrote a book about Julius Caesar. So he took so many things from Empire Rome and from Julius Caesar. Remember, Julius Caesar was not an emperor. He was a dictator. He was given the title of dictator for life, but they wouldn't make him king. And so his adopted son, Octavian Augustus, became the first emperor. So Napoleon combined all the military glory of Julius Caesar and all of the administrative ability of Octavian Augustus into something that he brought into the French system. And so empire waist gowns were one of them. And you notice, do you remember when I posted the picture of Evelina Ganska? in her 1830s dress with those enormous yellow balloons on her arms. As soon as Restoration comes back, corsets come back. So all of those pretty loose gowns of Empire period just are completely gone. What do you think of the love story of Balzac and Evelina Hanska? Any comments? That was just, I mean, you just can't make all of those details up. You know, the fact that she has this Polish count husband who is like, oh, yeah, corresponding with Balzac. Well, you know, bring him over. Let's have a chat. And then her sister, who had an affair both with Adam Mickiewicz, who was Poland's #1 poet, and with Alexander Pushkin, who was Russia's #1 poet. So those girls, and you know, can you imagine good old Evelina thinking like, my sister had an affair with Pushkin and Mickiewicz, and I am married to this guy 20 years my senior, and he had depression, her husband had depression. So can you imagine a vivacious Polish countess who is living with this older husband who just doesn't get it? And so she's like, oh, I'm going to write an anonymous letter to Balzac. You know, my sister decided to have affairs close to her home. I am going to write to Balzac himself. And he reads this letter, it's anonymous, and it's extremely astute. And he's like, who is this? He actually thought that it was written by a man who wanted to sign a woman's name under his sort of this very astute criticism. And so Balzac takes out a newspaper advertisement seeking the writer of this letter. And she happens to get this paper in the Russian Empire. And she reads the advertisement taken out by Balzac, and she's like, oh my God, he had a very clever way of communicating with me, because she was a little frightened. You know, she's like this, you know, wealthy countess living way back where she didn't want to reveal her name. Plus, she's extremely wealthy. And so he takes out a newspaper advertisement in a French paper, and she reads it, and they start corresponding. And then when her husband died, the family is like, well, all of this good money is not going to some French scoundrel. They really decided that they're going to save little Evelina from fate worse than death. And plus they said, you know, if you're going to marry him, then your daughter, and Evelina had 5 children with her husband, but only one survived infancy. And that was pretty common. Infant mortality was horrible. And so this one daughter survived. And so she really did not marry Balzac till her daughter get married, right? Because then her daughter was the recipient of the family fortune and the title, and Evelina was free to have fun. 5 months later, her husband died. So, Victor Hugo was a good friend during this time period. Victor Hugo was delivered the eulogy at Balzac's funeral, and he was one of the pallbearers. And then he stayed friends with Evelina, and bless her heart, she took Balzac's mother to live with her in the house that Balzac purchased for her in Paris with her own money. So she was a good girl. And then because she inspired so many characters in Balzac novels, she was Eve in Lost Illusions, and that's what I'm going through right now. Lost Illusions is a fabulous, fabulous novel. I love it. But the character of Eve was influenced by Evelina, and also the character of Madame Hulot in Cousin Bet, the long-suffering wife of another Napoleonic officer. And so she not only inspired his characters, but she was a good critic of his work. I mean, they've corresponded for 20 years. It's sort of like, in a way, like the relationship between Olga Knipper and Anton Chekhov, where he wrote these plays for her because she was an actress in the Moscow Art Theater, but he lived in Crimea because he had tuberculosis and he could not handle northern air. And so they would correspond with each other about the roles that he wrote for her. And Evelina inspired so many characters in Balzac, but she also was a critic. And so when he died, she was the inheritor of his literary legacy. And she spent her own money on publishing his collective works, and she edited some things that were left unedited at the end of his life. So yes, there were just, I was just reading a comment. So we have rambled away. We have wasted an hour on Balzac. Yes, Eve.
I just had one little, I guess it was an observation more than anything. I mean, it sounds as though he had he had positive female characters in his life, but he expresses such negative female characters in his writing in Colonel Chabert. It's kind of interesting. One would think that, you know, he must have had some bad experiences.
Yes.
A woman so horrible as Rosina, who wouldn't even give Chabert a little cottage by the stream and let him die in peace.
Right, right. Oh, that would be too nice. That would jeopardize her position in high society. Balzac had like a catastrophic life. I mean, it takes some doing to die at 51 in the 19th century. That's very, very young. I mean, one thing is his eating habits were horrendous. He was not just overweight, he was obese at the end of his life. And the constant coffee drinking. So he would start writing at midnight and he would just drink extraordinary amount of coffee. He could start writing at midnight and go on for 12 hours and then collapse and fall asleep. So his lifestyle habits were horrible. Speaking of prostitutes, well, you know, he was a Frenchman of the 19th century, and sky's the limit on debauchery at that time. So he definitely knows about prostitutes in France. He had a lot of love affairs with different women. He fathered children with women who were not his wives. He actually fathered a child with a woman who was another man's wife. So yes, French authors and Frenchmen of the 19th century, it was just not morally upright time period. Also, what was horrific for Balzac, I don't know if you know the term baby farming. Women did not nurse their babies in the 19th century, or like ever. So the example that I always give to my students is Romeo and Juliet, right? Juliet is always so much closer to her nurse than to her mother, and her nurse mentions, oh my goodness, my little baby, she would have been your age if she would have lived. Well, women who had babies who died were of very high demand all through the centuries because there was no baby formula, and aristocratic women didn't nurse their own babies. So everyone was scouting out for these poor women whose baby just died because they had milk. And so that's what happened to Balzac. He was sent to live with a nurse for the first few years of his life. So he had no emotional connection to his parents at all, but it was a very common formula. So it was called baby farming. You know, just you farmed out your baby to a nurse, and the baby lived with the nurse until, you know, the baby was like sort of human, right? Like 3 years old, when you could just have a conversation with the little creature. And it was devastating for Balzac. And then he was sent to a fancy school, but it was not a happy experience. It was, you know, if you think of like any Charles Dickens novel that describes miserable childhood and teenagehood in some school where you could not connect with anyone, that was Balzac's experience. And then he decided to pursue law. So the father was finally like, wow, the kid is going to make money. And Balzac is a lawyer by training, right? And so his negative portrayal of lawyers in all of his works comes from his experience with lawyers. And I think learning to be a lawyer just really did him in, because he learned what people are doing to each other and what people are capable of doing to each other through lawsuits. Let me think of novels that have lawyers. I mean, one of the characters who is sort of a recurring character in his human comedy is Rastignac, and he's a lawyer. And so he gives a lot of characteristics of himself to this character. So yes, Balzac had a very, very harsh life. I think this romantic correspondence with Evelina Hanska was just this charming, weird thing that happened to him. And thank God that that woman wrote to him, because I mean, he was delighted. And then when he met her, he was stunned because she was so beautiful. And, you know, when he passed away, she was this vivacious, wealthy widow in Paris. So she had a lot of lovers after he died. The story continues. It's not just that men played around during this time period, women played around too. Yes, he had a very harsh life from childhood, from infancy to childhood, to school years, to law training. And you can tell that these novels were written by a person who knows an awful lot about how horrible human beings are. Anything else? Well, we are, yes, go ahead, Leanne.
So I'm sorry, because we're over time, but I'm a retired lawyer. And when I got to the very end and saw or read D'Urville's description of his clients, a description, I guess it was his perceptions of his clients. It was so interesting because I was a corporate lawyer in the sense that I represented a lot of corporate clients, and the Supreme Court has said that corporations are people, and I saw a lot of that in what D'Urville said about his clients. Right. But at any rate, going back to your question about D'Urville and the conflict of interest, which I had picked up on very early, right? As a lawyer would, I kind of thought that he was a good guy, in the sense that I think he saw that given litigation, apparently as it was then, is very much like it is now, and it drags out for so long. He thought that the best way to serve Colonel Chabert was to work out some kind of an understanding between the two of them. Now, there was a conflict of interest that did work her interests, as well. Right. But I sort of saw him as a good guy, as actually a facilitator. And maybe he realized, because Chabert hadn't been able to find any other lawyer, that, now this is me rationalizing, that he could overlook the conflict because there's nobody else for this gentleman. So I have to help him. So that was kind of the way I saw it. I don't know whether you agree.
No, that's a fantastic comment. And I mean, there's no resolution to this. They could have gone to court and they would have destroyed each other. I mean, there's no happy courtroom drama outcome for these two human beings. She would have destroyed him and he would have destroyed her. What he wanted was not just a settlement, but for her recognition of him as Colonel Chabert. He knows who he is. And she is the last person who knows who he is. He wanted to see in her eyes him, the glorious young man. And he is not. He is a broken human being, psychologically and physically. And she cannot amplify him the way she used to amplify him in her eyes when they were both young. And that is the tragedy of these two human beings. And it's fascinating. And we'll go to Carolyn next. Carolyn. What is so staggering is at the end, he comes up to Chabert and he says, "Why are you here? Like, what happened? I thought you would be taken care of. And why didn't you pay me?" And Chabert says, "Well, because I can't. This is all I've got." And it startles D'Urville because he is stunned. And so Chabert feels for D'Urville at this point, because D'Urville kind of gave him money. And we never talked about the milkman, the milk farmer. I just love him, and I love his little three boys. And I love the fact that when Chabert comes out of the house and they are like, roughhousing is like, order in the ranks. They adore him. So those three urchins that are growing up on that pathetically poor milk farm, they love Chabert because he is a dude, right? He is a manly man, and these boys need his example in their life. But do you remember what Chabert does at that point? He writes a note and he says, "You're going to give this to Countess Farreau and you will be paid." Don't we just want to know what was in that note? But that's the glory of Balzac. He does not tell us what was in that note. And you can just imagine what he says to her. I bet expletives involved. And he just really gives it to her because, he knows that she's a woman without a heart. And he expresses that probably in a very soldierly way that would be just not acceptable on a Zoom about French literature. Yes, Corinne.
Yeah, you pretty much brought it up there at the end. The fact that the attorney gave the money to make him look good, to give him the clothes, to all that, I think that really showed a kindness on his part to try to present him in the best light.
Right. And that, Monsieur Derville runs a very, very efficient law firm. I mean, you can see it, those clerks, they are working hard and, they have a lot of fun and there's a lot of sort of jesting and joking, but they do their work. And I love the fact that just before he comes at midnight, his associate is laying out all the papers just perfectly. I mean, this associate knows what Monsieur Derville expects at midnight. And if it's not there, he's fired. And so he's laying all of these things out. And Monsieur Derville says, look, I don't have time. I have all of these court cases tomorrow and I'll give you 5 minutes, start speaking. And Colonel Chabert starts speaking. And did you notice that at that point, Monsieur Derville puts down the papers because he is stunned. I mean, he is hearing a human story that is ever so much interesting than the bedraggled, boring old yep of all of the cases that he has to deal with on a daily basis. This is the story of a lifetime. This is the play. This is the spectacle that you want to pay money for. So do you see how him giving money for, to make his client more presentable, like, the sort of the suit that you purchase for the person who goes to court because you want to make a good case. Hello, person peeking in the screen. There's someone peeking in. So you see, it is a play of human life. And Monsieur Derville just paid money to see the spectacle of this life unfold. And remember, he's showing this man to his friend and he says, you're not gonna believe who this man is. He is the great Colonel Chabert. So for Derville, it was one of the rewards of being a lawyer. Colonel Chabert is the kind of customer that you remember because it's the kind of customer that doesn't do it for a petty reason. He wants his glory back. And you can't get your glory back in a courtroom. You could get your glory back on a battlefield, but not in a courtroom. So that's the tragedy of restoration. And that just kind of glory is just gone. And we are the poorer for it. Yeah. So any more questions? Oh, I didn't think I had this in me. Like, where did this come from? I don't know. Yes. Corinne, one more question. Yes.
To mention that how I found you. It's kind of an odd story. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. This is my 4th book club that I'm in right now. I read voraciously, but several years ago, I decided to go back and read the books that I loved in high school. So in the last couple of years, I read War and Peace and The Count of Monte Cristo, among others, and Moby Dick, some other things, along with the secular women's book club, every month books that come out, bestsellers. I have a whole wide range that I read, but I wanted to not forget how to read those kinds of books. So my sister-in-law does not read anything. She watches Hallmark movies. That's it. She lives in Jackson, Mississippi. She knew a man who knew of you. And when she mentioned what I had been reading, she sent me the link, and I joined you at the beginning of Brothers Karamazov. So
I need to collect these stories. I think all of you will have to start writing stories of why are we doing this? Why are we the lucky few that get to talk about these wild things? Thank you so much. That is an incredible story, just incredible. And I have those songs that say, leave me alone. If you see this, leave me alone. I'm watching Hallmark movies. So those are good songs. Well, wonderful. So what next? I'm going to just have fun with Mom. And I am going to start tuning up my Stendhal information. And let's start the Red and the Black on April 1. So there was one more totally devious reason why I wanted to do Colonel Chabert now. I uploaded all the history information. So every time we start a new French novel for the rest of our Frenchiness, I will always tell people to go back to Colonel Chabert and read the history notes, those 20 history notes from the start, so that everybody would be caught up on what happened to France in the past 500 years. Because certain person in The Red and the Black will have a certain portrait that will be concealed in a certain place. And if we don't know from those 20 history posts the significance of Napoleon, we will be like, well, that's weird. And it's not weird. It's like, it's an attempt to be heroic in an age where heroism is just all poof, gone, blown off with the wind. And so April 1. So I'm not going to do any preliminary history posts. I might do a little preliminary info about Stendhal, who was a fascinating guy. Did you know that he was in Russia in 1812? He was procuring like stuff, the stuff that army needs for Napoleon. And he escaped and he got to Paris and only found out in Paris that the whole army was decimated. So Stendhal knows stuff. And Stendhal was a fabulous biographer. He was a fabulous, fabulous writer. And so we'll be, I'll probably do just a short bio post about Stendhal, and then we'll dive into, should we do like 50 days of the Red and the Black? I probably should write an announcement soon. I'll count the pages. I'll figure out how many chapters there are, and somehow make it doable. And we'll have so much fun. So I'll see you in the trenches of post-Napoleonic France, and we'll have more bedraggled fun. Wonderful.
We can't thank you enough.
Oh my gosh, this is so much fun. It's just like, it's all in my head.
It is for us. Yeah.
I just decided to download my brain. So thank you for trusting in my ability to get you through French literature, even though I don't speak French. But I'll just tell you this very sweet personal story. I was with my daughter in Paris once, and she had to see a pediatrician, and they said, well, the best pediatric hospital in Paris is the Jacques Necker hospital. And so, we showed up, and the doctors were speaking to me, and I'm like, I don't understand a word you say. And the French are notorious for not wanting to speak English. So, we like communicated. They brought a dictionary, we had back and forth. Can you imagine taking your 10-year-old to the hospital and having to deal with the dictionary? And then, just before we were leaving, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Like, you named a whole hospital for the finance minister of Louis the 16th. And he was like, why would you know that? You don't speak any French at all. And I'm like, well, I really know my French history and my French literature. And then they said, well, we need to do a lab work for your daughter, so she should go to the de Stael wing. And I'm like, oh my God, you named the lab for the daughter of the finance minister. And like, how would you know who de Stael is? I'm like, she's Madame de Stael. She wrote L'Allemagne, she wrote that book about Germany. And so they were just completely befuddled by this woman who just knows these weird, quirky facts about French history, but, just like doesn't understand anything else. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the stuff that I love that just came from my teenagehood. And we are reading my favorite novel for when I was 16, and that's The Red and the Black. So I'll see all of you, and bring more people in. By the time we'll be doing like the Count of Monte Cristo, it'll be so exciting. Thank you so much. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you for reading. Keep reading. Bye.